Let me just tell you who our panel members are. He needs no introduction. Zev Siegel, original co-founder of Starbucks and now a mentor to entrepreneurs. We're also joined by Natasha Sideris. Many of you frequent her bistro, trendy eatery in Johannesburg. She's since sold off most of her shares to famous brands, but she's very involved in the evolution and growth of that business. She is the original founder, creator, proprietor of Tasha's. Do welcome her warmly, please. Stephen Archer, international public speaker, change management consultant, entrepreneur himself, the founder of Spring Partnerships. He joins us again on this panel. And Matsi Modise, she is the National Executive Director of the South African Black Entrepreneurs Forum. She works a lot with enterprise development, with mentoring entrepreneurs and helping them really develop their ideas to a point where you see an enterprise develop beyond its fullest potential. And also, she herself is an entrepreneur. She has invested in numerous businesses, especially in the technology space. Please welcome Matsi Modise. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'll start with you two ladies because we haven't heard from you.
Yes.
The Wisdom Forum has chosen the theme tonight, cultivating the next class of entrepreneurs, getting into the mindset of the entrepreneur. What needs to be done to cultivate a new generation of entrepreneur?
Well, we are currently existing in very interesting times. Entrepreneurship and entrepreneur seems to be the it word. There's a great understanding that it will significantly contribute towards the growth of our ailing economy. However, there are essentially things that need to be considered. Not everybody's going to be an entrepreneur. We have to consider the fact that do we have an enabling entrepreneurship ecosystem that's going to support and enable small businesses and entrepreneurs to exist? However, if we do get it right, the socioeconomic impact of it is great because we are liberating a country, we are giving it an ability to create its own, an ability to look at problems and find solutions. And in South Africa, it's something that has to emanate from the ground going up. We have to have that culture that cultivates entrepreneurship. And I suppose now that entrepreneurship is a theme, entrepreneurship is what everybody's talking about since the downturn of 2009, banks crashing, everybody losing jobs, we have to get it right.
Cultivate, that's the operative word, Natasha.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about entrepreneurship, especially in my industry, in the food industry, I think a lot comes down to fostering the workforce, and a lot's got to do with training. And I think the more people are empowered within the workforce, the more you can build that entrepreneurial spirit. And it's especially tough in our business because a lot of the workforce is not taken seriously enough, and there's a lot of people within that workforce who have potential to be entrepreneurs, but they've got to be given the confidence to do that and be supported and mentored.
I want to stay with you, Natasha. Yeah. Matsi referred to creating an enabling environment.
Yes.
Some people would say it has less to do with what the government or the regulators are doing, and it has more to do with the individual. What's your view?
I certainly think that it's a balance between the two. When you talk about the individual, that individual's got to have the want and the need to do it. They've got to have a great support system. And then obviously the government has also got to do its role and be able to support that individual in wanting to succeed in their particular field.
Matsi, can we just explore that a little bit? The South African government has taken the mantle and is taking it upon themselves to create an enabling environment. And the most significant step they've taken is creating a ministry of small business. I've heard entrepreneurs say, we don't need the government to create another layer of bureaucracy. We just need them to grow the economy properly, introduce the right policies, we'll do the rest. So when you talk about an enabling environment, what do you mean?
Well, it's a multifaceted notion. It's not just the government in an ecosystem to create an enabling environment. An ecosystem exists with funders, with entrepreneurs themselves, with research institutions, venture capital. So it has different dynamics to it. And all of them have to essentially speak with one word. The challenge in South Africa is that we have a very scattered ecosystem. Yeah. You know, we are not able to monitor and evaluate the impact that the ecosystem has because we have not been able to identify the ecosystem. So government certainly has a role to play. It's wonderful that we have created a ministry that is now focusing on, you know, small businesses and growing small businesses. Yes, red tape seems to be one of the inhibitors. Ability to access funding. I mean, government, we're very fortunate in this country to have, you know, what we have, the infrastructure, to have funding institutions. But the reason why perhaps they're not as efficient is the education around that. If we had to educate small businesses around accessing funding, if you have an idea, you wake up one day and you say, I'm Natasha and I want to open Tasha's because I'm Natasha. It's just an idea. Not a lot of people are going to buy into that idea. Right. You know, you have to search far and deep for somebody who's going to fund that idea. So venture capital, angel investment in this country is still very little because it's very high risk.
I think that's an important point you raise. Zev, this is where I'd like you to come in because the United States seems to have a novel way of dealing with its entrepreneurs. If we look at Silicon Valley, right there in San Francisco, the techies are in very close proximity to the venture capitalists. And the minute they come up with an incredible software code, the money is just 10 kilometers away. What is it about the United States that really just nurtures that kind of relationship?
In the example you just gave about Silicon Valley, sometimes I think it's difficult to tell whether the money is chasing the entrepreneur or the entrepreneurs are chasing the money. It's quite a close family there. In general, though, the U.S. government does have a couple of programs that are worth talking about. Through the Small Business Administration, there's a name for you, the SBA, as it's known in the United States, there's a tremendous amount of advice and counseling and education made available to people who want to take advantage of it. And it's either free or low cost. Because it's free, small businesses take advantage of it, medium businesses hire consultants. The small businesses benefit from those programs. There are several networks, I was a part of one of them for several years, that work with entrepreneurs and small business owners. That's a pretty effective thing for government to do. The other thing that the Small Business Administration does in the United States is it doesn't make loans, it enables loans, and it does it through a mechanism called the Loan Guarantee Program. The SBA works with banks to make loans. A woman comes to the bank with a perfectly plausible idea. She goes through the vetting process. The bank's interested, but it's outside the parameters of the bank. It's a little too risky for them. The entrepreneur or the bank then goes to the local SBA office and says, could you guarantee my loan from the bank so that the bank will make the loan to me? And frequently, they will guarantee the loan. It makes the bank's position stronger. The bank makes the loan to the entrepreneur. That's a pretty nifty program, and it makes a tremendous difference for smaller startup companies. So those are two functions that government serves pretty well.
Stephen, a lot of times, and you referred to it in your talk earlier on, the largest impediment that entrepreneurs face is funding, and certainly here in South Africa, that is what entrepreneurs will possibly claim as their number one challenge. Is money the only thing that entrepreneurs should be concerned about?
I don't know what they should be concerned about. It's what they are concerned about, and I think a lot of let's say potential entrepreneurs, because we want to be talking about the people who are the future entrepreneurs of this country, and I suspect that vast number of good potential entrepreneurs really just don't have enough idea about how to do it, if you like, how to form a business, and there's enormous fear and apprehension about that, and the risks that go with it. And if you have a ministry of small businesses, which sounds like a great idea, I'm always really skeptical about any ministry, I have to say, from any government anywhere in the world, but hopefully this is a good enabler. then it should be helping to provide, even like education, but ultimately it's just got to be an enabler for people. Money is obviously critical. Getting that business case to your point and about Tasha's notional business idea, that needs a good business plan.
I want to raise another issue with you, staying with you, Stephen. I work in the business media, obviously, and statistically we're told that there's over 200 private equity funds right now domiciled on the island of Mauritius looking for opportunities on the African continent. The money is there, it just can't find the opportunity. So here's the disconnect. Is it because entrepreneurs, small businesses don't know how to market themselves, or the ideas just aren't good enough?
I should think it's probably a bit of both, and to be honest, there may be some very good ideas there, but if they are not put into a good plan, and you can see the case there, and you can see the potential, and you can see how it's going to be taken to market, it's going to be hard to raise the money. And actually, Starbucks, if you'd said, gone to a venture capitalist in day one and said, we're going to sell coffee beans, I said, so what? I think it's you've got to develop a story.
Natasha, you were
I'm shaking my head because I've experienced this firsthand. Tasha's is 10 years old. Had a fantastic idea, had no money, went to the banks, they wouldn't look at me. And so I landed up going to, and you'll hear the story 1,000 times, I landed up going to loan sharks and savory types that would break your kneecaps if you didn't pay your loan back. And I had a great idea and I had a business plan, but the banks just wouldn't look at me. And so, I can be very frustrating for an entrepreneur who's really got a solid idea and a track record.
What would the bank say?
You don't have surety, you've nothing to sign, you've got a track record in your industry and working in your industry, but unfortunately you don't have any collateral to put up, so we can't give you the money. So, had I not taken the risk and some of the things that you guys speak about in terms of perseverance, believing in your dream, being powerful and understanding what you want to do and really having a commitment to your vision, and then I took the risk. Had I not, Tasha's wouldn't exist today.
We'll hear about the story of Tasha's in a second, but Zeph, this goes back to a perennial problem that entrepreneurs often raise, in this country in particular, is the banks will only give you money if you can prove to them that you already have money. It's counterintuitive.
Yeah.
What makes you think that that's a problem only in this country? Yeah. That's also a problem in the United States and in many other countries too. It's an interesting conundrum, isn't it? You want to start a business, you don't have collateral. If I had collateral, why would I be talking to you about a loan? And you hear that kind of conversation pretty frequently. The problem is that banks are regulated and they can't loan you money for things that basically aren't collateral, hard assets. It's conceivable that if Natasha had asked them only for money for equipment, that they might have given her a little money. But that, it was bigger than that. It was actually a startup, and the equipment was a minor, not such a major part of it. It's the same all over the world. And the answer is, the usual echelon of funding. First, there's friends and family, right? And then there's angel investors, first the small ones and then the bigger ones. And then finally, if you're, in the United States, if you need over $5 million, it's time to go talk to venture capital. Venture capital, for those of you who don't know, is professionally managed investment money for business. It's a tough environment for small companies. So if you can't fund it yourself, if you're not bankable, usually the solution is to try and get an investor to back you. There is another kind of opportunity that some people are able to take advantage of, and some people here may have done it. It's called prepayment. You go to you're going to develop some new software. You go to the customer that you think would be ideal, and you say, how about this? And they say, wow, that's really great software. It doesn't exist yet, but it could if you funded it. Or maybe if you just prepaid for the first shipment. And there are some deals that get funded that way by going to a key customer.
Matsi, I'd like you to just talk us through some of the realities that young African entrepreneurs have to face, because there are unique circumstances. Many of these potential entrepreneurs are going to be coming out of what we call disadvantaged communities. They wouldn't have had a great education. They certainly don't have friends and family who can be angel investors, and they absolutely don't have collateral. All they have is passion and a will to succeed. That is all they have.
Sure. Just to add on to the funding chasm, we also have to cut the funders a little bit of slack, because a lot of the times we're very quick to complain about there's no access to funding, but have we taken the time to understand why? Natasha has built a great business. She's able to tell you the reason why they are not able to give me money is because I didn't have security. There's a reason behind that. You know, I used to be in investment banking, and I can think like an entrepreneur, but also think like a banker. So entrepreneurs have the responsibility to find more information as to what is really required for me to get this funding. You know, when it comes to security, when it comes to having a track record, I mean, somebody's willing to listen to you when you've been able to prove your concept, not just an idea, when you've been able to generate a market, because a lot of the times people actually put access to a market before access to funding, because if you have a reliable, sustainable market, you know, you've got paying clients. What else do you need? You know, and if you can prove that to the bankers, then, you know, things will be a little bit more easier. But then to talk on to the challenges of African young entrepreneurs, I think the challenges are immense, but it also presents opportunity. The reason is there is lack of information. You know, I come from a small farming village in the Free State. You know, if I lived in the Free State and didn't naturally go into Johannesburg or Bloemfontein, the big metros, it would have been very difficult for me to access the opportunities that exist in a Johannesburg or Cape Town. So that disparity, the inability to access that information is quite key. And then social capital is also very important. If I had uncles and aunties that owned Tashas or owned big industries, and I regularly engage with them, I'm exposed to their networks, life would be much more easier. But it's tougher if you're living in a small, farming village, and all you know is, people that have not necessarily created industries. So how do we bridge that gap is a function of, there's a lot of organizations similar to the one that I run, whereby we create ecosystems in underserved areas of our country. We connect the social capital to those who are never predisposed to it. It's something that we actively have to engage in. Yeah.
So let's just imagine, Matsi, I'm coming to you. I'm a 21-year-old with an idea to start a flower business. That's all I have. Maybe a little bit of savings. Entrepreneurship 101. What are just some of the key things I need to do to just get ahead?
I'd say get out and go sell that flower now. That's what I'd say. Go out and sell it. Because why should you then write a business plan around selling a flower? Why don't you just go get the market? Go assess whether people are willing to buy my flowers. Do that homework. Don't fantasize about the nitty-gritties. Don't harmonize about how government is not supportive. Go out and damn well sell the flower. That's what I'll say.
Tough talk.
This is the Nike theory.
The Nike theory.
This is the Nike theory. Just do it.
Just do it. I don't want to steal that.
Natasha, I want you to tell us very briefly
Yeah.
the story of Tasha's. I know that your father was already in the restaurant food
My
business.
dad was already, yes, in the food business. I had an idea in 2005. I was already in the food business previously. I've been in it for 22 years. Driving around in Johannesburg one day and said, there's a gap in the market for daytime cafe. So there's a lot of mass chains and a lot of sort of fine dining themed restaurants. And that's where the idea of Tasha's was born. But I had no money to do it. So I hear the argument is just go out and sell it. In my industry, that's really difficult. Unless you're going to go and sell food on the side of the road. I mean, it's a difficult thing. You want to create this cafe, you want it to be beautiful, you want it to be on trend, you want to fill this gap in the market, and that requires funding. So I did what I did, and I raised some money, and I was underfinanced by over R1 million, and had to dig myself out of that hole. I then later converted I had a Nino's in Bedford View, I changed that to a Tasha's, and then I was approached by famous brands. Lucky entrepreneur, hard-working entrepreneur, but I've also had a lot of luck. And Famous Brands bought 51% of the business, and I still own 49% of it. And they brought a certain level of security. Mine is a unique business in that I didn't need to come up with money after the second store, not because Famous Brands invested, but it's a franchise model, and the franchisees invest.
I've heard an expert say, any young entrepreneur, when you start a business, you must start a business with the express purpose and intention of selling it. When you start a business as Lerato, your game plan must be, within 5 or 6 years, I'm going to sell it. Is that correct?
I disagree with that argument. I think that I certainly didn't have any intention of starting Tasha's to sell it. My dream was simple, beautiful environment, great food, fill a gap in the market, do it right, do it properly, get the model right, get the numbers right. Love what you do. And then the rest came. So I certainly didn't start Tasha's with an end goal in mind, so, well, I'm going to exit in 5 years, and this is what I'm going to do. And even now, as I'm growing, that's,
Right. Must you have a growth strategy, Matsi?
It's ideal. It's ideal, but a lot of entrepreneurs don't have a growth strategy. They just go in it because they're very passionate about it. And what happens after, it's by sheer chance. Or, I just think you must just go in it to build it. However, you don't necessarily have to sell it. Yeah.
I have a comment about that one. I have an occasion when I've been a consultant to an entrepreneur or a mentor, use the argument that perhaps you should think about getting your business ready for sale when the entrepreneur is not performing up to snuff. Because then if they say, I'm going to sell in 5 years, then you can bring them to see that they have to improve their operation in whatever aspect it is it's missing. So it is. I'm not opposed to people thinking about having their business ready for sale. Whether they do or not, having it ready for sale means having an operation that's working smoothly and performing well. Maybe that would be a goal to shoot for.
Stephen, you've been quite silent.
It's unusual. Thank you. I actually think that the notion of building a business to sell, in the way you described it, I think is actually quite dangerous. And for the following reason. An entrepreneur is, by definition, the leader of that business. And as a leader, that person must serve the business, the employees, the team, the investors, all stakeholders as well as customers. It is a serving role. And if the entrepreneur has too much of a pursuit of the sale, it becomes a self-serving role. The business will suffer for it.
I feel like this conversation we started, we put the horse before the cart type thing. So let's go back a little bit. Starting with you, Zev. How do we cultivate a new generation of entrepreneurs? So we've got young South Africans or young Africans out there. They're not sure what their future holds. Some have good ideas. Where do they begin?
Well, I am a huge believer in education and various programs that introduce young people to the concepts of business. Programs like we've heard discussed just a minute ago. And I think that is the way, one of the keys to proceeding. Yes, funding is needed. Yes, a regulatory environment that's workable is certainly helpful. But enabling younger entrepreneurs to avoid the same bumps in the road that the older entrepreneurs went over is a really important goal. That's why I do a lot of mentoring. That's why I encourage people who have skills to do more mentoring. It makes a difference in life, but there are also the basics of seminars, working groups. These don't have to be necessarily exclusively in universities. They can be outside of universities on a very practical level. For instance, if you're going to have a flower vendor just going for it, why not put that person in a pool that meets every couple of weeks with other people and provide them some content so that they can begin to see the more complex aspects of business. I think those are the initial steps.
Natasha?
I think there's a big responsibility on big business to be mentoring and helping young entrepreneurs to understand again what the pitfalls are. If I had had that, despite my dad being in business, I wanted to go it alone. I think if you're a young entrepreneur and you've got someone who can listen to your ideas, tell you where to go, tell you what to do, without stifling you. Because I also think that a lot of times, too much guidance can stifle the entrepreneurial spirit. And if I look at me as an example, had I gotten too much advice, too much education, too much, maybe I wouldn't have done what I did. Maybe I wouldn't have taken the risk. People said, "Oh, you don't got a loan shark. You can't do that." Yeah. So.
Stephen?
Just some ideas. I mean, South Africa obviously is geographically really big, and to your point about folk in certain provinces lacking access, if you like. I think the first principle is that any indie entrepreneur that starts to employ people gets massive tax breaks for a certain number of years, if you like, and then other incentives to employ people. The other idea, which I've seen work in slightly different contexts, but I think hopefully it could work here, and that's to sort of create, if you like, regional hubs, little hotspots, incubator units, incubator areas, where you've got mentors that you placed, so you could have sort of 10 incubator regions around the country, and you put some mentors in there to support those young companies, and they may not all make it, but you've at least got. You've got then a structure and a mutually supportive structure in those regions, and it starts to percolate out into the culture of the society as well as businesses.
Matsi, where do they begin?
I would say private sector has a huge responsibility to invest in entrepreneurship and in entrepreneurs. Open up your value chains, open up your supply chains, do educate them, do integrate them. And the dividends obviously might not be realized now, because I know big companies, big businesses about dividends. But the investment you make in entrepreneurship holistically is going to really yield the dividends that we want. So do invest in small businesses.
I'd like to bring our audience into the conversation. So, ladies and gentlemen, by a show of hands, who have questions for our panelists? Yes, sir.
My name is Chris, and my question is, if you need a system to be built before you can start selling your main product, what would be the best way to source funding?
How do you find funding pre-revenue? It's interesting, in South Africa, there are institutions that do actually fund prototyping. For example, the Technology and Innovation Agency has some grant funding, and also the IDC. So do your research. There's recently a portal that's been released or launched 2 weeks ago called FinFind Easy. So it will be actually able to navigate you through all your questions. What industry, how much are you looking for? What are all your options? So it's good that South Africa has been able to launch FinFind Easy. So it's a wonderful platform.
Are there any, we see a lot of entrepreneurs emerging in areas like technology. A lot of people are developing apps. They're getting into social media. They're getting into retail and fashion. Are there areas where it's easy to become an entrepreneur? Or is it, open cards?
I'll take that one.
So will I as well.
Setting aside that it might not be easy to be an entrepreneur, if you're going to start a business that doesn't require a lot of capital, you're going to find it easier to become an entrepreneur. For example, if you are a good programmer and you have an idea for an app, you can actually develop that app by not sleeping at night. You don't need investment. On the other hand, if, like Natasha's experience, you're going to open a restaurant, you've got a problem. You need a lot of capital because it's a tangible thing. So service businesses, many of the basic levels of the tech business are pretty attractive because of their low capital requirements. It's fascinating what can be done. I've seen people do pretty substantial business with operating out of a laptop. That was their investment.
Yeah, actually a couple of years ago I would have said get into energy. But then the Saudis start opening up the taps and that all goes wrong. So anyone in renewable energy right now is feeling a bit sore. But the areas that I do see great potential for, and I see a lot of funding available for, is actually around agricultural technology to improve the yield from field to fork. That's a really big piece, and I think this country is extremely well placed geographically and in many other ways to exploit that. And the second one is healthcare, diagnostics, and life sciences. Those areas too are that there's always funding fairly readily available for that, and I say also high risk funding too. So people will take big swings at it.
Natasha, people love to use the word innovation,
Yes.
almost synonymously with the entrepreneur. If you're an entrepreneur,
Then
you're
you have to
creative
innovate.
and you're innovative. Is that true? And does innovation only ever involve technology, or can you be innovative in other ways?
No, I think you certainly can be innovative in other ways. I think it's a key factor for a successful entrepreneur to be able to innovate. Markets changing rapidly. Certainly in my game, it's a business, and food has become such a big business, and it changes so rapidly, and you have to be able to keep on top of it. So no, I don't believe that it's only in technology. I think innovation happens in many levels and in many different segments of the market.
Matsi, they often ask this question, or I've heard it being asked, where are the Steve Jobses in Africa? Where are these revolutionaries of commerce?
They are there. I think the unfortunate thing about South Africa is that we don't really celebrate our entrepreneurs. We hear of Elon Musk. We hear of Mike Shuttleworth. We don't talk about Melvin Lubega, who is a 26-year-old that has scaled his business. He's functioning in different countries. There is Franz Strudman. He is from Ikubu. He's just exited his business. He's a young man to Garmin. So we don't necessarily celebrate. We don't have a culture of celebrating our entrepreneurs. They are there. They are truly there, and I think we need to essentially profile and celebrate those who are not heard, especially the young ones. They're phenomenal. Their energy, their scaling, they're just amazing.
Do we have any other questions? Yes, ma'am? Sir.
Hi, Zev. You've built a massive global empire, and I think in some ways it's more difficult to keep a big business running than it is to start a new one. I'd like to know what keeps you awake at night.
What was the last part?
Do you sleep at night?
I sleep at night because I have no responsibilities at Starbucks today. Remember, it is Mr. Howard Schultz who is the CEO of the company. But scaling and sleeping don't track very well together, as your question implied. These are big decisions that people make. For instance, Natasha has a tremendous opportunity. On the other hand, she might want to ignore it so she could sleep at night, right? These are decisions that people have to make, and I think of it as a comfort level issue. And on a macroeconomic level, of course, we want everybody to grow their companies and employ as many people as possible. But the truth is that not everybody can scale up like that. Steve Jobs certainly could. He started in a garage and wound up running one of the bigger companies in the country. There are very few people that can make that transition all the way up. But that doesn't mean that's a bad thing. What we want is stable companies that have employees that continue to grow. Maybe not at the rocket ship rate, maybe not internationally. What we need is companies that can get on their feet and then keep going. It's very hard to do that. And if they're comfortable with it, continue to expand. What we don't want is willy-nilly expansion, random expansion that leads to the death of the company. That's terrible for the economy.
Stephen, I'd like you to add your voice here because I think that's a valid question. I've often heard it said it's fairly easy to start a business. It's harder to keep it going. It's even harder to grow it from small to medium almost impossible from medium to big and global?
Interesting is that there's a lot of evidence that startup entrepreneurs are actually unable to take a business beyond, say, 100 employees. And that's more common, I think, than not. And that's the point where they've got to recognize that and make room for other people who can do that. You need technicians, you need other experts, other different sorts of people who can cultivate and manage that growth. And I think that's really the lesson of it. I mean, Richard Branson's often held up as a great entrepreneur, but he's only great because he's employed great people around him to drive those businesses for him. He won't see him behind a desk. So that's the answer.
I think that's absolutely 100% correct. We've gone from, and it might not seem a lot compared to Starbucks, certainly not, but we've got 14 restaurants with our international store in Dubai, 15. We went from one little store employing 100 people. We now employ 1,400 people because they're big restaurants. And I've had to look at myself in the mirror and say, what do I need to do in this business? Do I have to step away from certain aspects of our business so the business can grow? Because at a certain point, about 3 or 4 years ago, I was actually holding the business back because I wanted to do everything. Not that I'm not involved in everything, I still am, but I certainly now have got to employ someone who's going to do the cooking. I can't make every single dish. I've got to employ someone who's going to look at the numbers because I can't look at everything all the time. So I think surrounding yourself with the right types of people, getting the right people on the bus. Right. Otherwise, you won't be able to grow.
But what are the tools, Mati? Some people say, sell the business, franchise the business. There are ways to grow it into a much bigger entity.
I think I'm out of my depths in that regard because I haven't grown a global business. But perhaps, Natasha could give us some insights on that.
She's copying out Natasha. So
I am afraid. I don't want to give a cop-out answer.
She rescued me in the beginning. So it's fine.
My turn.
I think different businesses require different models. In the food business, you can either franchise or you can company own. You can do both. Then you really require a unique skill set when you're doing both. Some businesses are not built for franchise model, So I think it's unique to each and every single industry.
There also is a question about franchising as a method of financing.
Yes.
It's what we're basically talking about here. Are you going to grow by through internal profits, through debt, or through taking in more equity? That's one way. Or are you going to franchise? One of the issues with franchising is now you find yourself in 2 businesses. You are running, say, 14 restaurants, and now you are going to franchise. That means that you have to have a separate group of people who are handling the franchising because selling franchises and managing them is a different business than running restaurants. And I've seen that as a significant problem for people who said, wow, my 14 restaurants are really going great, so I'm going to franchise now. Oops. They thought that they could just, put one person in the next office and that would take care of it. In the United States, for example, the franchise document that you have to file with each state you're operating in where you're selling franchises is $40,000 approximately. That's crazy money. And so that it is a different business. For some types of businesses, it works really well. In the coffee business, Starbucks doesn't franchise, but Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf and Costas do. Yeah. They're both successful companies.
I think the key point there, though, is that initially, to start with, whether you want a franchise or company owned, you have to have 1 unit or at least 2 units that work. That yield profits. The business model is sound, because if you're going to take money from franchisees, they've got to know what return on investment they're going to be getting. Right. Can't just be selling them an idea.
We're almost at the end. Last round of questions. Any questions? 2 questions. There's a question over here and over there. Question, the gentleman with the glasses over there and over there. Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Joseph. I just want to check with the panel. As these small developing entrepreneurs, and you see big business in South Africa moving to the townships, whether it is via bus against the taxi industry or your Pick and Pays, your ShopRite, whoever you call, to the small restaurant? Is that the right thing, to grow those small entrepreneurs? Thanks.
Could I ask you, please don't sit down, sir. Could I ask you just to clarify your question? What is the problem with the Pick and Pay going into the township? Because they're pushing out the smaller shop owners.
Indeed, they push them out. Because we're expecting mentorship, good competition to grow them up, but instead, we see these small ones shrinking.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sir?
Hi, my name is Daniel Cartoon. I'm 18 years old currently, still writing my matric finals at the moment. I've got one tomorrow. So I just wanted to ask generally, sorry, I've got a question here. So stepping into the entrepreneurial enterprise as it is, how can, or we as the upcoming entrepreneurial group, the youth as we are, how can we ensure that the future holds any security over the long term, where survival becomes a prerogative against the need for, or the wish for success, major success or small success regardless? Entrepreneurial, the world as it is, might scare many people away.
Right.
So the need against the wish for success, against the prerogative for survival becomes a battle which people are unsure of what to do.
Right, fantastic. There was one last question. Yes? Yes, sir? Got you?
My name is Guy Channels. I have a question for those of us who work for big businesses. I feel like an entrepreneur, but I work for Old Mutual, and if you can put on something like this, you're a big business. What would you say to big businesses like Old Mutual that think it's a good idea to innovate and grow through an entrepreneurial type of activity, but from within their own ranks?
Okay, fantastic. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, questions are closed from the floor. Let's start off with the question from our young matriculant. At the end of the year, he's finishing his matric. Stephen, that's almost the equivalent of sort of your A-levels. He's going out into the big, bad world. His parents, society's always told him, get a degree, get a job. He's got the entrepreneurial spirit within, but he's scared. What if I fail? What if it all goes belly up? What's the advice?
Well, first of all, I'm really delighted with the question. I'm really pleased to have you here. It's great how someone's really got that future in front of them. And actually, give me a number. I'll get my card off me, and we'll stay in touch. Please do. I'd just love to help you. You clearly want to do it. You know what? There's always going to be fear there. There's always going to be risk. It's absolutely normal. And the reality is, I would say that how much security is there in being employed by somebody? There's no such thing as total security in any work that you do. So if you have an opportunity or an idea, a great idea hopefully, that is going to give you the potential to have control of your own destiny and therefore your own security, take that as being of more value and more powerful than any apprehension or fear that may go with that. And to my point I made earlier, you're always going to have two heads. And in this case, it's going to be fear and optimism. And just keep that optimism one, keeping the fear one in check. It's going to be there. It's going to drive you. It's actually going to be part of your energy.
Yeah. I can relate to that because I was I suppose 25-year-old who studied, went to university, got a commerce degree, got a wonderful internship at one of the premium banks. I'm not going to mention because it's not green. And then 2 years into it with my internship, I realized that I was not a fit for this. My purpose was somewhere else. And the day when I had to make the decision to leave, I just thought, the fear of staying was greater than the fear of leaving. I had no idea where I was going to go. I was not going to go next door to find another banking job. I just left. And the rest is history. I'm writing my own history. And I agree with you, Stephen, that corporate South Africa is no longer secure. Our parents could work in Old Mutual and they'll die in Old Mutual. That was the norm. Right now,
life policy.
Well, please don't have life policies. But that notion is gone. I was reading something about most Standard & Poor 500 companies. The lifespan was 64 years, now it's 15 years. So corporate South Africa is no longer secure. Whatever fears you have, you need to get over them. Follow your passion, because your script will be written by the passion that you're pursuing. Yeah.
I don't want to belabor this point, but it is a valid question that an 18-year-old is asking. And in fact, it's a question that 38-year-olds ask themselves, 48-year-olds ask themselves. If I leave my job as an executive with its perks and its bonuses, where will I go and have the same perks and bonuses? Do I start all over again?
In entrepreneurship.
Yes. Do I leave my high-paying job to be an entrepreneur? I've got a mortgage, I've got school fees, I've got responsibilities.
A normal person would ask that question, wouldn't they? Especially a person who would say, married with children. The fact is that some people just can't handle the risk. And that's not a sin. Having a job with benefits and a life to call your own is a wonderful thing on this planet. And, we don't all have to be entrepreneurs. I think what we need to do is to worry about being at 7% entrepreneurship when you'd rather be at 20. That's okay, but we don't have to ever go to 100%. It's possible to have a perfectly fulfilling life and actually be innovative in a large organization. If you can handle the risk, and if you are in a situation that would enable you not to jeopardize others, like your family, it's wonderful to be able to give it a go, especially for our 18-year-old friend in the audience, where you have less to lose.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That is a lovely position to be in. Not that I would ever hope that you would fail, but if you did, it won't be crippling for the rest of your life.
Okay.
So the tolerance for risk becomes a major question.
Natasha, a question was raised about big retailers, for instance, going into the townships and competing with the mom and pop stores, the kiosks. Those are also entrepreneurs in their own right, and they probably have a lot more at stake. Competition is healthy in a free market, but too much competition can be damaging.
It's unavoidable. There's no ways that you could get away from that. The big retailers are entrepreneurs themselves, and they're going to want to go into those markets where they can reap the rewards. So it's a more social question than a business question, because business is there to make money.
I suppose the question is, how does that small spaza shop, as it's called in South Africa, that small mom and pop shop, corner cafe, cope in an environment of excessive competition?
The obvious thing would be service and his connection to his local community. But it would be very difficult for him to compete in terms of price points. A big retailer like Pick n Pay is going to be able to sell sugar at X amount per kilo, and the guy in the spaza shop's not going to be able to. And again, it's more of a social question rather than a commercial question and a business question, because in terms of business, it is a free market. Unavoidable.
Matsi, the last question I think is quite apt for you. You work for a big company. You enjoy working for a big company. It has many benefits for training, for advancement. But that spirit of entrepreneurship burns within you. Can you be an entrepreneur within the context of a corporate? And what can the corporate do to help you?
I think you can be, but will your environment allow? Because nothing is stopping all the energy from popping out of you and being creative and defying the odds and being the odd one out. You can be that, but will your environment allow that? Will your bosses really encourage and build you and say, yes, I'm sure you've got a solution for this problem? I think we have to encourage that ability to say to employees, we've got a challenge right now, and we're putting it out to you, and could you essentially come up with a solution for it? Right. Have a mini hackathon of sorts within an environment. It would be nice if we had, leaders that would encompass that kind of culture, but I don't know if South Africa is ready for that.
But sometimes, Stephen, when we talk about entrepreneurship within a corporate, it's not you selling cupcakes to your colleagues. That's not entrepreneurship.
No, you're right.
It's actually an owner-led kind of business model. When you are made a divisional head, an MD of a division, run with it like it's your own.
So I can't speak to the culture of OLDMUTUAL, but larger organizations, and I'll just for safety's sake exclude OLDMUTUAL in this conversation. Larger organizations are often bound by process, politics, people, protocol, and also they're intolerant of failure, interestingly. They're intolerant of risk because it's been too long since they actually had to manage that kind of risk. And you've actually got to give someone permission and trust even to fail. And you ring fence it by all means, but you've got to give them absolute permission to fail and go for it in the same way as if it's a startup.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, a final question in closing. We saw a very disturbing statistic earlier on. The viewers wouldn't have seen it, but we heard it in the talks earlier on. South Africa, with all its structural and economic challenges, has 7% of economic activity driven by entrepreneurs. That 7% account for almost 50% of the jobs. A small pool of people are now the job creators, and yet there are a small pool of people. What needs to be done to change that, Zev?
Support programs that would enable more people to do a good job of establishing companies. For instance, let's take a man who is a truck driver who has an idea for a delivery company that's a need that isn't being filled. If there are support programs for that person, including lending programs, there's a good chance that he would actually weigh the risk and decide to open the company. And those kinds of programs need to be augmented. Fortunately, there seems to be a movement in South Africa to enlarge programs like that. And I would expect that the 7% is going to become a history and that there'll be a much larger number that are involved in entrepreneurship.
How to have more entrepreneurs, Natasha?
Sorry?
How to have more?
How to have more? I think for the people who want to be entrepreneurs, building programs that allow them to understand what the barriers to entry are. And I think when people can really understand what the barriers to entry are, then they can maneuver themselves around those barriers to entry or understand how to deal with them.
If we agree that entrepreneurs are the third most important character in society, then any government should endorse that. It should be part of their mandate to support, and by support I mean actually generally get out of the way, but support entrepreneurs. Every employee of government, every institution should have a post-it note next to the laptop that says that entrepreneurs are the future of the growth of this country. Help them.
Nancy?
Many have ideas, many start a lot of businesses, but a few survive and a few actually grow their businesses. So I feel that we have to invest in the skills give entrepreneurs the ability to run their businesses and build their businesses. I think that's very, very important. And give them the confidence to say that we have given you the sufficient education, we've given you sufficient capacity, now go and run and build your business.
Right. Matsi Modise, Stephen Archer, Natasha Sideris, Zev Siegel, thank you very much for your time.